Thank you. My name's Ram, so I'm talking from a personal perspective here. So thank you for the panel for your views and your stories. Nothing's changed really. 30 years on, Greta, you mentioned nothing's changed and nothing will change. So I've worked in a number of sectors, and I'm hearing these stories, and they're very soul-destroying. So my question to the panel and to the audience here is, why don't we have a citizen charter that's set in legislation, in law, that every citizen of this country abides by it? Because if we keep fighting the institutions with the problems they've got, they're not going to go away. I don't see them going away. I've heard this in the NHS, I've heard it in every sector I've worked in, and to be honest, we've got too many battle scars, and I'm hearing it day in, day out. So really, why can't we have a legislation that puts into place a citizen charter that puts into place that everybody's mandated to behave in a particular way?
Thank you for that. I think, why not? I mean, look, at the end of the day, the legislation we have at the moment produces cosmetic rights, which no one can enforce. So you have the image of having anti-discrimination protection, but you have none at all in practice. Yeah? Which is why no one uses it. And everyone's running around fearful of being victimised. That's the truth. If that suggestion works, I will vote for it. What was said earlier about us forming a little collective group, I buy into that. People in this room have the power of change.
Hi, Stephen Grant. I read today or the other day that half of GB News articles were about Islam, and I would imagine most of those are negative. And if you look at the social media environment, which tends to promote misogyny, hatred, and racism, mainly because it creates more rivals, which creates more money for those companies. So you see right-wing forces building, and we elected the Labour Party on a platform of change, but I've been disappointed that I haven't seen any change so far in the race rhetoric of the leadership of the Labour Party, and in fact all I've seen is a celebration of continued and even upped flights of sending people back to Brazil and other countries. So one of the panellists mentioned that they were still optimistic, but I think we have a few years of being optimistic if we can see a real change agenda within the Labour Party, and I'm not sure that we are going to see that on what we've seen over the last few months, and I wonder if there's any comments on that.
Okay, all right, so spoken to a lot of Labour MPs since they're coming to power. Main thing on their minds is what? Second term. Second term. How do you get a second term? Don't do anything controversial. Yeah? The far right's on the rise, Reform are on the rise. What are you going to do? Aggravate their supporters or look the other way? Labour have got a big decision to make, because if they don't get this right over the next couple of years, we're in a lot of trouble. You imagine this society with the Equality Act, not abolished in the way I want, replaced with an Inequality Act, which tackles structural racism, but abolished without any protection at all. Imagine that country. That's where we're headed.
I suppose the greatest tool on... I'm currently working on a book in America called An Argument for a Nonpartisan America, because the partisanship is obviously a part of the great divides. My position is fundamentally, let the politicians be partisan if they choose, but we as citizens, let's step away and out of our partisanship so that we can go back to, or maybe perhaps establish a more value-centric approach to how we want to be led in those circles. Bottom line is, from my perspective, the greatest impetus for change at the political level is public pressure, right? It's what you do on the streets, on the ballots, and very vocally in order to influence political change, because your voices have to be heard, and your displeasure with their performance has to be vocalized in as many circles as you can find.
Hello, good evening. My name is Ben Lindsay. I'm CEO of a charity called Power to Fight. We empower communities to end youth violence, but when I think about it, actually we empower communities to end symbolic, institutional and systemic violence, which isn't just about young people. One of the things which I suppose has surprised me is that no one's actually spoken about the impact of the police on young people, and I think it's actually a shame we haven't actually got more young people or any young people. And I'm also doing a PhD at the moment, which means my fieldwork is in a local school in South East London, which means I get to engage with young people and teachers on a regular basis. And in the last week, just 3 quick examples. One, there was a knife search in a school, in a train station near the school. A 14-year-old was stopped and searched. They didn't find anything, but because it was the first experience of that young person being stopped and searched, he panicked and he ended up in handcuffs. One example. Second example, a young person whose brother is well known to the police, has been stopped 9 times and nothing's been found. And then the third example is a 9-year-old whose first experience with any police was the British Transport Police and got cornered by 3 of them just because apparently they didn't have the right ticket. And we all know that actually 9-year-olds don't need tickets on trains, but they didn't stop. That's all happened in the last 2 weeks. So my question really is one around police in schools. I'm just interested in what you feel about that, because I think for me, we all know that the trust levels are down in black and brown communities, but I don't know if you have actually had any conversations with young people. It's not just down, it's non-existent. So this conversation, and just to be clear, I also work very closely with Sadiq Khan, and even with MOPAC's view on police and schools, it differs from the Violence Reduction Unit's view on police and schools. So I'll just be interested in the panel's view on whether we should have police in schools and how we actually build trust with young people.
Good question. I'm going to pass this to Andy because Andy is going to grab it. But racism affects schools, affects universities, affects all parts of our society. I can also share a story where there's a 9-year-old walking back in a leafy part of North London from school, was stopped by police officers and questioned quite severely. And when they left him there in a state of tears, he walked home. He only had about 100 metres back to his home. Parents complained. Police said they stopped him as a welfare check. They were worried for his health and safety. Yeah? Answer any police officer would tell you is, well, if they did stop on a welfare check, why didn't they take him home? They didn't. They just left him there. So poor kid's traumatised. Interestingly, parents are too scared to take it forward because they fear retaliation. Yeah? So it is a problem, and my own son is 12. There's more racism in playground now. It's growing.
So just to pick up on your work, I've seen some of the things that you've been doing online. Just yesterday we were in Tulsa working with a number of young people with the Damrell Taylor Trust, with the Hope Collective. We've worked with the Rio Ferdinand Foundation, so I know exactly what you're chatting about. One of the events we did a while ago in Peckham as well, one of the young people that were in the audience had actually just been stopped and searched, roughed up, threatened with arrest if they didn't give the officer the IMEI number of their phone, and we had to actually talk them through the process of complaining around that. So I completely get where you're coming from. The young person and the impact of racism in policing is something that we're really passionate about and pushing on. Around the prevention side, and your school's point particularly, we've a real opinion about whether officers, particularly in London, should be in schools. I think the concept and why they were there, placed there in the initial stages was about education, building, safeguard and crime prevention. What has happened over time, they have become an extension of the school discipline system, and they are being brought in. So whenever there is an argument, whenever the teachers can't control it, then they're bringing the police in, which is reinforcing the negative trust, the lack of trust that's there completely. So I don't think, particularly in London, that they should be. In the initial stages of the race action plan, we asked for research around that. So in work stream 3, which is around community engagement, which is what some of the other cabinet members and the NBPA were at, we met the National Police Chiefs Council this morning, and we were pushing back on this. One of the community engagement pieces was meant to be assessed at and to make sure that young people were happy with what they wanted. I think the whole bit about youth-led bits, it focuses on violence rather, as you said, on the issues. It worked really well in the first violence reduction unit in Glasgow, where it was a white police service working with the white working class community, with a white council, etc, etc, etc. It hasn't worked. London's probably got, if I'm honest, the worst VRU that I've seen in the UK. It needs fundamentally changed and reformed because it does not focus in on the issues and the root causes of the problems. Poverty, inequality, lack of opportunity. All of those things are the things that we should focus our attention on, focus on money and the attention that the police should be delivering on this. I know of one VRU where police officers actually use the engagement with young people, the intelligence gather. My own view would be that we shouldn't be around it really at all. We should be dipping in and out. So we should be coming in out of uniform, in tracksuits and other stuff, letting the young people see the person under the uniform, for the officers to see the good in the community, and I think that's where we start to build a trust and common ground. For us, even inside of policing, our white counterparts do not see their loved ones, do not see somebody in their social circle that look like anybody in this room. So all of their information from the social media, the media, from all of the things that you see, negative perceptions, they're then enforcing people, and the only time they're coming in contact with somebody is whenever it's a negative interaction. That needs to change, and I think that the bit around schools is just completely wrong. So the safer streets, the focus on knife crime, it's don't focus on the problem, focus on the solutions, work with young people, put the money in there and just reform the VRU side, but I don't think they should be in schools.
Just real quickly, we have about 2 decades of data in the United States on police and schools, and overwhelmingly in the data, it shows that, especially in the early years of this, what they call COPS programs, or kids, where put the police officers full-time in the schools, it was a gateway for black and brown community to the justice system, an absolute gateway. So it really can be very problematic if, and so there's lots of information and data for what has gone wrong and is still going wrong in some communities with cops in schools, at least in America. Here.
Yeah, just to go back on the MOPAC side, look, the Metropolitan Police is still institutionally racist, isn't it? It hasn't moved forward at all. If anything, it's going in the wrong direction. The Metropolitan Police have to own responsibility for that, but who else is responsible for that? The Home Affairs Select Committee. They've had the data for decades, but haven't done anything about it. Yeah? MOPAC. MOPAC have had the data for decades and haven't done anything about it. So when Casey came to the conclusion, which we all knew anyway, was the conclusion that any objective person would get to, MOPAC, Equality and Human Rights Commission, Home Office, Home Affairs Select Committee, should have really had an emergency convening of what have we failed to do. That hasn't happened. They're happy to point the finger at the Metropolitan Police management and change the leadership. But they're not happy to do the things that might be politically unpopular to get the change done. So MOPAC's part of the problem, sorry.
No, it won't. No,
Thank you very much. Nikki Adewey, founder of Bounce Black, which is a social enterprise that champions the workplace and wellbeing needs of black professionals. Also co-founder of a campaign against workplace and whistleblower retaliation called Project Zero. I would also like to offer a part comment and question to the panel. I would like to ask any and all of you, how are we to have any confidence in the promises of change by the police when activists and whistleblowers may find themselves on secret and illegal watch lists involving law enforcement using tactics reminiscent of the 1960s FBI's COINTELPRO. Those methods targeted black activists with infiltration, intimidation and discrediting. And in case the reality of this phenomenon is disputed or denied, I'd like to point out the recent revelation of secret police activity in the UK, having marked out activists and leaders speaking about race, including the likes of the Right Honourable Diane Abbott. And lastly, I myself have been experiencing this for the past 2 years, among other covert harassment techniques such as organised or gang stalking. So again, I ask, why should we believe anything that the Metropolitan Police has to say around its progress on clamping down on institutional racism? And when will the police stop treating harmless, anti-racist advocates like security guards the way they treat people of colour in supermarkets?
So the first thing that I would say is I wouldn't trust what they're saying. And that's me speaking as a police officer, as president of the MBPA. There has been a regression, not progression. And that's what I'm chatting about: words, apologies, glossy brochures and no change. This cycle of kind of where we've been, that all of these issues are in the past. The undercover policing review that's going on at the minute is bringing a lot of revelations around. The Lawrence family were put under surveillance, Roland Adams' family was put under surveillance. Even in the MBPA, we used to have to meet whenever we were first forming in hotels. The early members used to take out their mobile phone batteries, they used to turn them off. They would only tell where they were going to meet at 30 minutes before. So this is replicated across the board at the minute. In 2003, the president of the National Black Police Association found a bug in his phone. And that was what was going on at that stage. We should have been pushing for key participant status in the inquiry as well, because I have no doubt that we are still being looked at, we are still being infiltrated, and that some of that may well still be going on in the external environment. So I have no evidence to say one way or the other, but I would be honest that I would say, and we regularly joke about it, that we're probably being looked at, that our phones are potentially getting tapped, etc., etc. Certainly our work environment, we try to work off emails, so we're not working on the police system. And the operating principles that the National Police Chiefs Council is trying to bring in, they're trying to force us to work in police systems so that they can keep an eye on what we're doing. So I would say you can't trust them at this minute in time to bring about change themselves. I don't think you can trust anybody to bring about change whenever they're the ones that have everything to lose, which is why our big push is around fundamental reform being pushed on the police from an external viewpoint, so that it is forced on people like it was forced on us in Northern Ireland. If that doesn't happen, then policing will never reform. We will go in the continual cycle. Every 20 years, a big seminal report. The reason that policing is facing such a crisis in confidence at the minute, apart from the fact that racism has increased, we are also community-wise able to raise it a lot easier. Think about Doreen and Neville Lawrence. They had to get a lot of people around. They had to do leaflets, put them out and about. They had to get a journalist on board to actually bring it forward. Nelson Mandela really amplified where things were for that. Now somebody can video something on their mobile phone, put it in social media, millions of people can see it. That's what there's a pushback on from police as well. So I would say just bring it on, force it on us. Don't let us do it ourselves. And I would say you always judge us off our actions, not from our glossy brochures and our nice words.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the whole panel were going to say you can't trust them, quite clearly. My phone's been hacked 3 times. 2 of them was when I was acting on a higher profile race case against a Met, by coincidence.
I mean, yeah, it's similar to Andy. How can you trust any Met police? But we've got to go wider, national policing, when they can't even admit institutional racism. And I think you just have to look at what policing's about. Just last month, the National Police Federation, that represents over 33,000 of its members, have talked about racism of low expectation. And last week, they carried out a survey, results of which they spoke to about 500 of their officers out of 33,000, and their anti-carnival, anti-black agenda really came out when they spoke that officers didn't want to police the carnival, they'd rather crawl through broken glass, called it a war zone, yeah, when they police football, they don't actually make those comments. So you're absolutely right, and whistleblowers do need more protection. I was a whistleblower, and the way that I was treated, I certainly would not go forward with anything, so I totally understand what you're saying. And no, you can't trust them. I think that's what we've all said.
But also you have allies here, yeah? That's important to remember when it gets a bit hard. Sal, do you want to ask a question? This is Sal Nassim, who worked at the ILPC, and his book's out. So we're not promoting his book, we're just asking if he wants to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lawrence. So I was Director for London at the ILPC from 2019 to 2023. So some of the stuff I dealt with was Bianca Williams' case, Chris Kaba, Child Q, basically every press I dealt with it all. And I left my role last year. I walked away because the system nearly broke me, and that's the truth of it. Now, my kind of question to the panel is kind of an observation and a direct question, which I really want to see what the panel think about. There's a lot of conversation here today around the fear of the Met. We've spoken about fear of children and their fear of police officers from the Met. We've spoken about black police officers and their fear of their own organisation. We've had the president of the NBPA speaking about the fear. And I came from a system where I worked for an organisation that was the independent organisation there to investigate the worst forms of police misconduct. And they had that same fear of the Met. And I've seen that same fear everywhere. The Met is big. The Met is incredibly powerful, and they know how to use that influence. And I've seen that fear in political circles, I've seen that fear in other organisations, and I agree strongly with what the panellists have said around it needs a Royal Commission, and ultimately the Met needs to be broken up. The Met needs to be broken up so that Londoners get the police service they deserve, but also those officers inside the Metropolitan Police get the organisation that they deserve. But who will be brave enough to make that decision? How do you get to that place when the Met is so big and the Met is so powerful? And that's the question which I always struggle with. So I'm going to pass that hospital pass over to
there is a fear of the Met, but I think policing nationally. But here's the question. Before we start ripping up anything, surely it should be about leadership. People need to be led, and what's lacking in the Met, for me, is strong, and I've said it before, strong ethical leadership. Now, the Met is big, but if you break up the Met, you're going towards an American model of policing, where you've got sheriff's departments, I don't know how many states you've got in America. And the danger with breaking up the Met and making it more localised is that you will lose intelligence. We know that it's bad in sharing of intelligence. I don't think the Met should be broken up. I think that should be the option that we take at the end. I think, first of all, the option is to get good, strong, ethical, courageous leadership that actually deal with those issues and are brave enough to do that. And I agree with Lawrence. I think, is it about changing leaders? Do you change the players? If you change Mark Rowley, who's going to take over? Are they going to be any different? We had Cressida Dick, we had Mark Rowley. They're doing the same thing. And I think the answer is strong ethical leadership, but also from the political stance, you need strong political leaders to have the will to actually, exert external intervention. But I don't think the answer is at this moment, is to break it up.
And I'm the same. The thing about breaking it up is if you've got something that's not working and you break it up into loads of little pieces, then you just get lots more of things that aren't working. And I think sometimes there's this thing about the size of the Met that people talk about. But the reality is, again, what you hear about in the Met is all over the country. Every force in the country will have the same issues, but it's magnified in London because of the size. But the other thing I think about in terms of the Met, there are other big companies, global companies, that have, a good culture, good philosophy, good ethos and what have you. So it isn't size, it's not about the size of the Met that's the issue. And I think if people are talking about, this fear and what have you of the Met, there's a long history and legacy of how the Met's depicted on TV and, some of the things, the legacy and the things that went before. And so I think those things are still embedded in our culture as a society, not just in policing and that fear. And I think, as Lawrence said earlier, the political aspects of all of this isn't just about one police force, one commissioner, and what have you. This is about the staying power of who's in government and who's going to rock that boat and things like that. So it's so much bigger than just the Met, although the Met is a big force. It's so much bigger than that. So I think for me, it isn't about breaking it up, because I don't think that's going to solve the issue. So that's not, the problem isn't the size of it. And so I think it's about looking at really the root causes, and we've talked about loads of those today, but I think that's where it is, and starting from there as opposed to breaking it into pieces.
So I'm just going to nip in before Andy gets back, because I know he's on it. The Met, I believe, is too powerful. It's a $4 billion a year organisation. What do you do with an organisation that's too powerful? Because all power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You dilute their power. You begin to start taking the power away from them. For example, an elected commissioner. For example, hiving it off. But most importantly, I think for present purposes, just taking the power away from the DPS to investigate misconduct. So if you're a white officer and you do something corrupt or racist, you're going to get sacked. If you're a black officer, you speak up against racism, you're going to get protected. That would be such a massive change, and it would take the power away from them.
I almost feel like I'm going to break into a cold sweat. But I agree with Sal, and I would dissent certainly from the views expressed before. I think the Met should be broken up. I spoke at the London Assembly at the Police and Crime Committee. Wasn't meant to come out at that moment, I'll be honest, but I got frustrated and angry hearing the same apologies. There has been progress, it hasn't been far enough, it hasn't been fast enough. The issue with the Met isn't just around London, and it isn't about its size. Definitely don't want to get into a conversation about whether size matters or not. But 35,000 officers, the UK's top cop is not the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council. The UK's top cop is the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police Service. They have national responsibility for counter-terrorism, for loads of different things. The National Police Chiefs Council, the body that looks and brings all of the chief constables together, about 90% of their staff and a large sum of their budget comes from the Metropolitan Police Service. The Metropolitan Police Service investigates people in this area. So they have probably dossiers as long as your arm with different people. So I think that's where the fear comes from, because of where they are, the power that they hold. But for me, they disproportionately taint the national aspect. I said, if you have 5 police services, so one in the northwest, one in the northeast, one southwest, one southeast, you deliver policing at a more localised level. You have 8,000 officers rather than 35. That's similar to West Midlands, to Greater Manchester, to West Yorkshire, the other big places that they are. The Commissioner has 35,000 officers. There are some Chief Constables that have 1,200. Put that into how much the Commissioner wields power rather than a Chief Constable in a smaller county force. Their national responsibilities as well. Everything that they have, the National Race Action Plan, the reason that it's failing at the minute is because London were largely in charge. And from my position as President of the MBPA, the reason they wanted to be in charge, they didn't do anything locally, they did stuff nationally, because if the national plan brought stuff in that could be enforced and pushed in the Metropolitan Police Service, they would have to say no, or they would have to do it. So they wanted to maintain control. So for me, break it up into 4. One that sits around here, diplomatic protection. You have 5 Chief Constables, you have less commanders that have 2 minutes time in their hands to get up to different things, but take that power away. And it's not just about the size of it, it's then about the power that they hold nationally, but it needs to be broken up. We can't go through the same bit. And for leadership, Cressida Dick was changed to Mark Rowley, and we just changed the person at the top changed, but the rhetoric stayed the same, and nothing else has changed. So leadership isn't going to bring it about. We've been chatting about that for many, many years. Fundamental reform, forced on policing, the Met being broken up as part of that, is something that we would definitely advocate for.
Just real quickly, because I'm certainly, when you have a force that is so powerful that has become intimidatingly frightening to the citizens that it's supposed to serve, I don't understand the willingness to tolerate it in that form. We have somehow forgotten the Peelian principles, right? So Robert Peel, you know, the father of modern law enforcement, as we all acknowledge around the world, right here in the UK, set the standard for contemporary policing for the entire world. And yet I'm hearing right here in the UK, the largest and most powerful police force is actually feared by its people, which is totally contrary to the Peelian concept itself. So I just want to say that from a perspective of the 5 pillars that I spoke to you about, I agree that leadership is absolutely essential in terms of the interrelatedness of having the laws and policy that properly govern how that department behaves, the accountability, the standards education and training, the accountability to a community, not the fear created within a community, the accountability community, and the appropriate leadership. So if you break it up because it's become far too powerful, yes, then you put the ethical leadership in charge to ensure that there is accountability, adherence to new laws, and updated policies of performance, accountability, and community engagement around it. If a police department, which Robert Peel said serves with the approbation of the people, now serves with fear imposed upon the people, that's too big, that's too powerful, and size does matter in this case, because the Met, again, as Lawrence pointed out, at $4 billion, that doesn't even begin to represent what that real power means. It just talks about some of the magnitude of that reach.
So when you're having a lot of fun, time tends to fly by, and it has flown by. So thank you very much for attending, and to the speakers and